Hello, everyone. My name is Ian Murphy, and today we're going to go ahead and continue on with Chapter 6 of Ariel Toff's Blood Passover. Chapter 6 Magical and Therapeutic Uses of Blood. Reading the depositions of defendants accused of ritual child murder with relation to the utilization of blood, one is left with the clear impression that, rather than explain the need for the blood of a Christian child, the defendants were attempting to provide a description of the wonderful therapeutic and magical properties of blood generally, and of blood extracted from children and young persons in particular. The principal emphasis was placed upon scorched, dried blood which been reduced to powder. Such blood is said to have been used as a hemostatic or coagulant of extraordinary effectiveness when applied to the wound caused by circumcision. Angelo da Verona had no doubt in this regard and explained to the judges at Trent that once the blood had been reduced to powder, Jews normally saved it for later reuse when their sons were circumcised to heal the wound in the foreskin. If available, they were said to have used other hemostatic powders as an alternative, such as Bolo di Armerina and the so-called, quote, dragon's blood, unquote, a sort of dark red colored resin known in pharmaceutics as Calamus draco or Pterocarpus draco. The physician Giuseppe de Riva del Garda, known as the, quote, hunchback Jew, unquote, who had circumcised Angelo's son, normally used it during the course of the holy operation. Obviously, Maestro Tobias, who rightly considered himself a medical expert, also knew how to prepare the magic hemostatic. Quote, "You take the blood, allowing it to coagulate, then you dry it and make a powder out of it, which can be used in so many different ways." End quote. Giovanni Hinderbach seemed scandalized by these revelations and has censured the wickedness of the Jews in healing the circumcision wounds of their sons and the blood of Christian children in his opening address at the Trent trial. Quote, "As with other things, Tobias confessed," unquote, explained the Prince Bishop, quote, "They medicate their circumcisions with the powder of the coagulated blood, and then, in the second or third day after the operation, recovering their health," unquote. Elias and Merselkin, as well, two of the brothers accused of the terrible multiple homicide of Eddington and Alsace during their trial in 1470, attempted uselessly to beat around the bush before the inquisitors' demands relating to the use of the blood of Christian children by Jews. This blood was then utilized for the marvelous balsamic qualities which it possessed, beneficial in curing epilepsy and eliminating the disgusting body odor of Jews. But in the end, they both admitted to making use of the magical healing liquid to cure the circumcision wounds of their sons. Leo de Forsheim, the most illustrious among the defendants, accused of acquiring blood from the children killed at Eddington, confessed that he had procured it because it was required for the circumcision procedure. Leo had known that the powdered blood of children was used as a coagulant of proven efficiency on those occasions for more than 20 years, ever since the first time he had been present at a circumcision ceremony with his father, 20 years before. The Jews accused of ritual child murder at Tyrone in Hungary in 1494 also declared, among other things, that they had used powdered blood as a circumcision hemostatic. The widespread use of blood as a powerful hemostatic among the Jews is probably the reason for the widespread notion that the Jewish males, all directly or indirectly guilty of decide, suffered painful and abundant monthly menstruation periods, presumably anally. Perhaps first advanced by Cesso de Ascoli in his commentary Disfara by Sacrobosco in 1324, This eccentric opinion is said to have received enthusiastic support from the Dominican friar Rodolfo de Selstad in Alsace. The Jews, the killers of Christ, and their progeny were said to have been inflicted with an abnormal escape of blood, menstruation, bleeding, hemorrhoids, hematuria, or blood in the urine, and exhausting fits of dysteria, which they were alleged to attempt to cure through the application of Christian blood as a homeostatic. Quote, I heard from the Jews, ... that all the Jews' descendants of those guilty of deicide have escapes of blood every month and often suffer from dysentery, from which they frequently perish, but they recover their health by virtue of Christian blood, baptized in the name of Christ. End quote. Circumcision, hemorrhages, epistasis or nosebleeds, overly abundant menstruation, open hemorrhoids, abnormal abdominal flow, the most effective cure to control and heal always seemed to be recourse to the powerful and magical powdered blood of children. But in this, the Jews were acting no differently from the Christians of surrounding society, despite Hindenburg's feigned and artificial stupefaction. In popular medicine, blood, whether human or animal, was alleged to be an indispensable component in the preparation of elictuaries, or powder-based medications mixed with honey or syrup to form a paste, and estrogen powders of extraordinary effectiveness. As Pierre Compensary wrote, quote, a sacred and alchemist hemostatic blood, and not incorrectly in epochs in which hemorrhages represented terrible tragedy, was considered a powerful healant. End quote. According to the prescriptions of the Theatrum Chemicum, marvelous unguents and powders were derived from human blood, capable of arresting even the most resistant flow of blood and of expelling dangerous infirmities. The most expert specialists knew that human blood possessed great therapeutic powers and was therefore to be prepared and treated with the greatest care. They therefore recommended that, quote, it being ascertained that it is perfectly dry, it should be immediately placed in a bronze mortar, which must be quite hot, and should be ground with a pestle and made to pass through the finest sieve, and after all of it has passed, it shall be sealed in a small glass pot, and must be renewed every year in the springtime. End quote. Be that it may, that the Jews, when they describe the operation of circumcision addressing the Christian public, prefer to omit the use of children's blood among the, quote, restrictive powders, end quote, and limited themselves to listing others, such as the classical dragon's blood and coral powder. Leon de Modena, the noted rabbi of Venice, in his classic Historia de Riti Hebraic, described the ceremony of circumcision, Berith Milah, briefly as follows, quote, the mohel comes from a plate upon which are the instruments and things necessary, such as a razor, estrogen powders, pieces of bandage with rose oil, and some similarly use a bowl of sand in which to place the foreskin, which is cut, ... The mohel continues, and with the mouth sucks the blood flowing from the wound 2 or 3 times and spits it into a glass of wine, after which he places dragon's blood, coral powder, or things which staunch, and piece of bandage soaked in of rose oil on the cut, and binds and bandages it tightly. He then takes a glass of wine, ... and bathes the infant's mouth with the wine in which he spat out the sucked blood. End quote. The omission of powdered blood from among the homeostatic powders could not be accidental. Confirmation of this point could easily be obtained from, quote, Jews turned Christians, unquote. They would naturally never have concealed such a scandalous practice, assuming that they actually considered it scandalous. Shumel Namias, a Venetian and disciple of Leon de Modena, later baptized under the name of Giulio Morosini, discussing the topic of circumcision, did not conceal his severe censure of the custom of placing blood mixed with the wine of the child's mouth. This practice seemed to him in implacable conflict with the biblical prohibition against the consumption of blood. Quote, "Tell me, moreover, is it not against the divine law, expressed in several places, that the blood is not to be eaten or drunk? And then, in the rite of circumcision, you place the circumcised boy's own blood issuing from the foreskin, mixed in wine, in his own mouth, adding to your greater transgression, and repeating that in the blood he will live, almost as if he were to be nourished by that blood." End quote. But of the utilization of the blood of the Christian child as a hemostatic applied to the wound caused by circumcision, the convert Morosini made no mention at all, almost as if the practice were unknown to him or did not merit considerable attention. Quote, "At this point, the mohel arrives, and behind him another person with a basin or cup in his hand, containing all the instruments necessary to the ceremony, some silver tongues, which are placed as a sign of how much foreskin is to be cut, a container full of dragon's blood and other astringent powders to clot the blood, and 2 cups or small soup plates, one containing an absorbent material cut up for the purpose, greased with oil of balsam or rose oil to medicate the cut, and one filled with the earth or sand in which to place the foreskin, burying the portion of the foreskin which had been cut off. ... Having completed the above, the mohel squeezes the little member of the circumcised boy, and sucking in the blood several times, spits it into a glass of wine, prepared for this purpose, and finishes by treating the cut with the above-mentioned oil and powder." End quote. Another converted Jew, Raphael Aquilino, baptized in 1545, and later appointed by the Holy Office with responsibility for confiscating the Talmud and burning it in the territories of the Duchy of Urbino and the Mark, never dwelt in the slightest upon the presumed Jewish custom of using powdered Christian blood to heal the circumcision wound, instead concerning himself with the analogies between the Holy Trinity and the 3 recurrent elements in the ceremony, applied to the bury of the foreskin in the earth of the cemetery, the egg and wine, which after washing the wound is given to the infant to drink. Quote, "Similarly, they take 3 things for the said circumcision, i.e., the earth from the sepulchres, and they put it in a basin in which they place the flesh, which they cut off the foreskin, the wine with which they render thanks to God, ... and 3 eggs, while in the basin, into which they pour the wine used to wash the foreskin, ... and they wash the circumcision wound with the wine 3 times." The famous Tuscan convert Paolo Medicini describes the ceremony of the circumcision in detail, with obvious hostility, but seems unaware of the use of coagulated blood as a hemostatic powder. In fact, he restricted himself to observing without further detail that, quote, "the mohel places astringent powders, rose oil, and similar things on the cut as a sort of dressing, ties it up, bandages it, and delivers it to the godmother." End quote. One could at this point conclude that the use of powdered blood of children, and especially Christian blood, as hemostatic during circumcision, in view of the disinterest in its regard shown even by converted Jews on other points inclined to defame Judaism, is a chimera and a tendentious invention either of the inquisitors obsessed with blood or of Jews themselves, terrorized by torture and slavishly eager to placate their tormentors. But this would be erroneous and misleading. Oh, wow. That's interesting. The texts of the Practical Kabbalah, the handbooks of stupendous medications, Segulot, compendia of Portatius Electraries, recipe books of secret cures, mostly composed of the German-speaking territories, even very recently, stressed the hemostatic and astringent powders of young blood, above all, on the circumcision wound. These are ancient prescriptions handed down for generations, put together with variants of little importance, by Kabbalistic herb alchemists of various origins and repeatedly reprinted right down to the present day in testimony to the extraordinary empirical effectiveness of these remedies. Ilya ben Moshe Lon, rabbi of Worms, known as the Baal Shem, literally the patron of the name, in his Sefer Telodot Adam, quote, Book of the Story of Man, in Hebrew and Yiddish prescribed that, quote, to arrest and flow of blood from the circumcision and that which flows from the nose, one must take the blood, boil it under the fire until it is desiccated, reduce it to a powder, and place it successively on the cut on the circumcision or on the nostrils, so that the blood coagulates. End quote. We find a similar recipe in the Derek Hatshem HaNikra Segulat Israel, quote, Way of the Life, also called the Book of Portentous Remedies of Israel, end quote, by Chaim Lipschutz, which adds another magical medication, this time intended to arrest the menstrual flow. Quote, Take the menstrual blood and a chicken feather, which thou shalt immerse in the menstrual blood of the patient. When the blood with the feather has been well shaken, cause it to be dried before the fire, making a powder of it, which thou shalt administer to the woman in wine. End quote. Sachajar Plongani Simonir, in his classic Sefer Zechariah, quote, the Book of Medical Briefs, end quote, was also rather precise as regards to the biblical references to the extraordinary curative and restrictive powders of blood. Quote, to stop the flow of blood from circumcision or nasal hemorrhages, using the coagulated blood of the child or the patient, the blood is placed before the fire until it hardens, and then it is crushed with a pestle, making a fine powder to be placed on the wound, and that is what we have find written in the book of Jeremiah 30:17. Quote, For I shall restore health unto thee, and I shall heal thee of thy wounds. End quote. It is to be understood in that fact that it shall be precisely from your wound, i.e., from your blood, that your health shall be restored to you. End quote. It does not, therefore, appear that there can be any doubt as to the fact that, though an antique tradition never interrupted, empirical healers, Kabbalists, and herb alchemists prescribed powdered blood as a healant of proven effectiveness during circumcision or hemorrhages. The fact that this practice was probably anything but generalized should not lead us to suppose that it was not actually in use, particularly in the Ashkenazi Jewish communities, where stupendous secrets, first transmitted orally, then printed in suitable compendiums, are said to have enjoyed extraordinary success over time. On the other hand, empirical knowledge of all analogies kind, even if obviously applied to contingencies other than circumcisions, were a heritage of surrounding Christian society, proving themselves profoundly rooted, particularly on the popular level. Two other Jewish customs relating to circumcision, which do not appear to have been uniformly widespread from their geographical and chronological point of view, are also of particular interest. Here as well, popular beliefs based on magical and superstitious elements seem to possess a vigor and vitality capable of circumventing the precise norms of ritualistic Judaism, halakha, or of seriously distorting them. The ritual responses of the Genonim, the heads of the rabbinical academics of Babylon, active between the 7th and 11th centuries, refer to the local custom of boiling perfumes and spices in water, thus rendering them fragrant and odorous, and of circumcising children, making their blood gush into that liquid until the colors were mixed. Quote, it is at this point, unquote, the rabbinical response continues, quote, that all the young males wash themselves in the water in memory of the blood of the pact, which has united God to our patriarch Abraham, end quote. In this rite of propitiatory nature, the blood from the circumcision wound, united with the sweet-smelling potion, is said to have possessed the ability to transform itself into a potent aphrodisiac used in curative electures, beneficial in lending vigor to amorous desires and to the procreative abilities of the initiated males. One form of magical cannibalism related to circumcision may be found in a custom highly widespread among both the Ashkenazi Jewish communities and Jewish communities of the Mediterranean region. The women present at the circumcision ceremony, but not yet blessed with progeny of the male sex, anxiously awaited the cutting of the foreskin of the child. At this point, throwing inhibition to the winds as if at a pre-established signal, the women hurled themselves upon the piece of bloody flesh. The luckiest woman is alleged to have snatched it up and gulped it down immediately, before she could be mobbed by the competing females, who must have been no less hardened and highly motivated. The triumphant winner was no doubt whatever that the proud titbit would be infallibly useful in causing the much coveted virile member to germinate inside the impregnated abdomen through sympathetic medicine. The struggle for the foreskin among women without male progeny appears to, in some way, similar to today's competition among spinsters and nubile young girls for the conquest of the bride's bouquet after the wedding ceremony. Oh my goodness. Giulio Morosini, alias Samuel Namias, remembered with much annoyance this repellent custom which he had seen rather in vogue among the young Jewish women of Venice. Quote, "The superstitious women are as remarkable in this regard. If sterile women wishing to become pregnant happened, as they frequently did, to be present at the circumcision ceremony, not a single one of them would hesitate to fight off the others and steal the foreskin, and the first one to grab it never hesitates to fling it in her mouth and swallow it as a sympathetic remedy of extremely great effectiveness in causing her to be fruitful." End quote. This is some disturbing crap. Rabbi Shabbatai Lipstutz confirmed this extraordinary custom, quote, "of the struggle amongst the women to swallow the foreskin immediately after circumcision as a wonderful secret in the production of male children." End quote. He added that there were rabbis who permitted it, such as the famous North African Kabbalist Chaim Yosef David Azulay, known as the Chida, the Enigma, and the rabbi from Saloncina, Chaim Abraham Miranda, while others energetically prohibited, considered it as a scandalous and impermissible practice. But the Kabbalistic herb alchemist Raphael Ohana, expert in the secrets of procreation, although he possessed little skill in gynecological sciences, referred with satisfaction to the results obtained from women having swallowed the foreskin of a circumcised boy, even in recent times. In his guide, intended for women wishing to have children and entitled Mar'eh Ha-Yaladim, quote, "He who shows the children," end quote, the expert North African rabbi advised that to make it more appetizing, the unusual dish be covered with honey, like a homemade sweet. The magical and empirical tradition linked to the foreskin of circumcision as a facilitating element was not lost over the course of the centuries, but was protected by the secrets of the practical Kabbalah despite the disdainful opposition of rationalistic rabbis. It was a common belief that the Jews used blood in powders, dried or diluted in wine or water, applying it to the eyes of the newborn, to facilitate their opening and to bathe the bodies of the dying, to facilitate their entry into the Garden of Eden. Samuel Fleischhacker, Israel Wolfgang's friend, indicated for the ritual murder at Regensburg in 1467, attributed infallible magical properties to young blood, which, spread on the eyes, was said to have served to protect from the evil eye, ayin hara. All the cases examined above, and in great number of those present in the compendiums of the Segulot, remedies and secret medications drawn up and disseminated by the masters of the practical Kabbalah, constitute the exterior use, so to speak, of blood, whether human or animal, dried or diluted, for therapeutic and exorcistic purposes. But the accusation leveled against Jews of ingesting blood or of using it for ritual or curative purposes in transfusions taken orally appears at first glance destitute of any basis, being in clear violation of biblical norms and later ritual practices which permitted no derogation whatever from the prohibition. It is not therefore surprising that the Jews of the Duchy Milan, in their petition to Gian Galeazzo Maria Sforza in May dated 1479, intended to defend themselves from the ritual murder accusations spreading like oil on water after the Trent murder, by recalling the biblical prohibitions and stressing that these accusations had no basis in fact. Quote, that they are not guilty is easily proven by their effective proofs and arguments, both legal and natural, from very trustworthy authorities. First, for the Jewish law, Mosaicha, which prohibits murder, and in several places the eating of blood, not only human, but of any animal whatever. End quote. Also, the most authoritative among the accused in the Trent trial, Mossi de Wurzburg, known as the Old Man, in the initial phases of his interrogation, did not hesitate to mention the rigid biblical prohibition against consuming any type of blood to demonstrate the absurdity of the accusation. Quote, 10 commandments given by God to Moses, end quote. The learned Hebrew leveled at his accusers, quote, commands us to refrain from killing and eating blood. It is for this reason that Jews cut the throat of the beasts which they intend to eat, and what is more, later salt the meat to eliminate any traces of blood, end quote. Mossi, the Old Man, was very obviously perfectly well aware of the norms of slaughter and of the salting of meat prescribed by Jewish rituals, and which apply the Mosaic prohibition against eating blood with the maximum severity. But his arguments, as we shall see, although apparently convincing, were to some degree misleading. In fact, if we turn once again to the compendia of Segulot in use among Jews of German origin, we find a broad range of recipes providing for the oral ingestion of blood, both human and animal. These recipes are stupendous electuaries, sometimes complex in preparation, intended to cure ailments and bring about cures, as well as to protect and to cure. For Shabbatai Lipschutz, to arrest the excessive flow of menstrual blood, it was advisable to dry before the fire and reduce into powder a chicken's feather soaked with the menstrual blood. The morning afterwards, a spoonful of that powder diluted in wine and served up to the women on an empty stomach was said to have infallibly produced the desired effect. Another secret medication, collected by Lipschutz and considered of extraordinary effectiveness on the basis of long tradition, was prescribed for women who wished to get pregnant. The recipe provided that a pinch of dried rabbit's blood be dissolved in wine and administered to the patient. As an alternative, a composite of worms and menstrual blood could be of great utility. Also, Ilya Lones, the Baal Shem of worms, celebrated the extraordinary properties of rabbit's blood in impregnating sterile women. The expert Kabbalist, moreover, prescribed for the cure of epilepsy the dilution in the wine of dried blood from a virgin making her first menstrual period. In this regard, it should be noted that Merkellen, one of those condemned for the plural ritual murder at Eddington in 1470, stressed the effectiveness of using young human blood in curing epilepsy. The Compendia of Segulot furthermore stressed the progenious properties of human blood, naturally always dried and prepared in the form of curdles or powder, as the main ingredient of aphrodisiacal elixirs, inciting to love and copulation, in addition to their ability to bring about the fulfillment of the most arduous and consuming of erotic dreams. It is not surprising that the blood was sometimes featured in relation to matrimony, another fundamental rite of passage, in addition to its uses in circumcision and in the preparation for death. In the popular tradition, included, for example, by the Jews of Damascus, quote, a man who wishes to win the love of a woman should extract a bit of his own blood, and after dyeing it before the fire, cause it to be drunk, dissolved in wine, by the woman who is the object of his passion. End quote. This electuary is said to have been proven effectiveness in such cases. Other compendia of segulates state that the recipe was to be considered valid for both men and women, and that to be of greater effectiveness, the blood should be taken from the little finger on the right hand of the person suffering from an unrequited passion. The defendants accused of the ritual child murder at Tyrannae in 1494 and at Posen, both in Hungary, in 1592, also mentioned the use of blood as an aphrodisiac and inciting love, including the most particularly in the celebration of matrimony. In the famous case of the supposed profanation of the host stolen from the Knobloch church in Brandenburg in 1510, the rich Jew mayor of Ostenburg was accused of having purchased the host at a high price to extract its essence and then of using it on the occasion of his son Isaac's wedding to prepare an aphrodisiac elixir intended for the bride and groom. In the Trent trial, the women, particularly those linked to the authoritative Samuel de Nuremberg, the acknowledged head of the Jewish community, made no secret of their great faith in the effectiveness of the blood of children as an ingredient in sublime potions, both curative and protective, of which the popular medicine and the practical Kabbalah were extraordinarily rich based on long tradition. Bella, Mosse de Wurzburg's daughter-in-law, stated without hesitation in her statement in February 1476 that, quote, that the blood of a child was beneficial in a manner wonderful to women incapable of birth at term, end quote. The women recalled that when young Anna Montagana, daughter-in-law of Samuel de Nuremberg, was pregnant and suffering from the threat of miscarriage, her mother-in-law, Brunetta, as a woman and an expert in these things as she was, visited her in her bedroom, making her take a spoonful of a medicament consisting of dried and powdered blood dissolved in wine. On another occasion, Bella had seen Anna pregnant and suffering, sustained herself with a bit of blood mixed with the yolk of a soft-boiled egg. For their part, Bona and Dolcetta, respectively the sister and the wife of Angela de Verona, recalled with nostalgic stupefaction their meeting with an herb alchemist of great fame and experience a few years previously. According to them, this Kabbalistic quack, known as Maestro Jacob, possessed a book full of secrets of exorbitant and extraordinary effectiveness, including that of causing pelting rain and hailstorms. To do this, it was necessary to mix young blood with the clear water of a fountain while pronouncing formula and exorcisms incomprehensible to the uninitiated. As we have already stressed several times, it is not difficult to arrive at that conclusion when the Jews were accused of ritual murder, rather than justify the necessity of the, so to speak, religious uses of blood. They preferred to expatiate at length upon the magical and therapeutic functions of blood generally, both human and animal, known and widespread among the people and in particular among German-speaking persons, both Jewish and Christian. This does not yet explain how the Jews, and the Ashkenazi Jews in particular, could reconcile the biblical prohibition against the oral consumption of blood, which was rigid and without exceptions, with the custom apparently well-rooted of using it, nonetheless, in medications and elixirs of various kinds proven and tested over time. Since these elixirs are often true and proper medications, even if not contemplated by official medicine, the Jewish ritual law, halakha, only permitted them when the patient was considered in danger of his life, in which case the complete and temporary abolition of all the norms of the Torah, Jewish law, was permitted in order to save the patient. But as we have noted, in popular practice, blood, both human or animal, appeared even in preparations to be administered to patients suffering from minor complaints, or complaints of only relative seriousness, or even as a curative in the toils of love. Confronted by these obvious contradictions, even the defendants of the Trent trial found it necessary to take a position and to explain the justify such things. And this was not an easy task at all, partially because many of them lacked the necessary culture to do so. Lazzaro da Seravalli, servant in Angelo de Verona's house, attempted to do so instinctively, without entering into any overcomplicated reasoning. In his view, the dictates of the Torah referred to animal blood only, which was always prohibited, while it was permitted to ingest the blood of human being, particularly if it was the blood of a Christian, the declared enemy of the Jews and Judaism. As usual, Israel Wolfgang, who must have possessed rather more culture than Lazzaro, although not strictly rabbinical, attempted to supply a more elaborate response, ingenious and less crude. To the young artist from Bradensburg, it was clear that the Torah and later rabbinical regulations presumed two different moral codes, one applying to the Jewish world and the other applicable to the surrounding Christian world, which was different and often hostile and menacing. Therefore, that which was prohibited between Jews was not necessarily prohibited in relations between Jews and Christians. For example, the biblical norm which prohibited usury between two brothers, Deuteronomy 23:21, quote, "Unto a stranger thou mayest lend upon usury, but unto thy brother thou shalt not lend upon usury," end quote, was interpreted as concerning exclusively relations between Jews, while usurious lending to Christians was automatically permitted, so much so as to be universally practiced, with a bold analogy, which we decline to believe was extorted by Jews, exponentially erudicated in Jewish matters by means of ingenious verbal and psychological trickery. Israel Wolfgang maintained that even the biblical prohibition against human blood was absolute for Jews and rigid when it involved blood extracted from the veins of Jews, but it was permitted and even recommended when originating from the body of Christians or Christian children in particular. In this regard, it is worth recalling that in that which Camposeri calls as, quote, "the dark tunnel of necromantic medicine," end quote, specialty shops offered alchemists and herb alchemists oils and balsamics extracted from the fetant mummies, miraculous elixaries containing the powder of craniums, often from persons condemned to death, fat from the human flesh, distilled from the bodies of murdered persons and suicides. It is not surprising that popular medicine should also have permitted them as legitimate medications, prescribing them not only in the cure of serious and dangerous complaints. The sole recommendation in these cases remains the explanation that oils, fats, and bones and powder, mummies, and human flesh in poultices, as Israel Wolfgang explained to the judges of Trent with references to the human blood, were not to be extracted from the corpses of Jews. The rabbinical responses were rather clear in this regard, when they hastened to stress that, quote, "there is no prohibition against usefully benefiting from the dead bodies of Gentiles," end quote. Perhaps the solution to the biblical and rabbinical contradiction between the consumption of blood and the custom established among the Ashkenazi Jews of consuming it on the most varied occasions may be identified in a late response of Jacob Reicher of Prague, 1670 through 1734, head of the Yeshiva of Ansbach in Bavaria, and later active at Worms and Metz. The ritualistic text contains testimonies to a practice widespread over time, memorable among the Jews of the German community, and considered de facto permissible, notwithstanding the fact that it is obviously contradicted the dictates of the Talmud. Being a custom now generalized among the Jews, it came over time to assume the same strictness as a ritual standard. The inquiry in Reicher's response referred to the consumption of the blood of the stambecco for medicinal use, even in cases in which the patient was not in danger of his life. Quote, inquiry. What is the basis for the fact that the most Jews traditionally permitted the consumption and drinking of the coagulated and dried blood of the ibex, a long-horned alpine mountain goat, known as buck's blood, and dried in the sun, even in the event that it may be consumed by patients whose lives are not in peril, such as people suffering from epilepsy, when it is one of the internal organs of the body which causes pain. Response: the legality of this custom must be upheld because it is long established. The medication is obviously permissible because clearly when a custom becomes widespread among the Jews, it must be considered to be on the level of the Torah itself. The ritual motive of the permission is based, in my view, on the fact that the blood is dried to the point that it is transformed into a piece of wood and contains no moisture. It is not, therefore, prohibited in any way. End quote. The authoritative German rabbi sought to uphold the ritual lawfulness of the dried blood totally without any liquid component, stating that in his manner the blood must be considered to have lost any alimentary connotations. But obviously, the central justification of his argument remained that the notion that a custom established over time in his community of Israel, even in contrast with the norms, was to be considered perfectly authorized and permissible. It has been accurately observed in this regard, but the reasoning may be opportunely repeated in other cases as well, as we shall see that, quote, the Ashkenazi Jewish community, in the eyes of its rabbi, represented the community of health, zealous in the application of the law of the Lord. To those rabbis, it was impossible to conceive of the fact that thousands of Jews, devout, God-fearing, and solicitous in sanctifying the name of the Lord, may his name be blessed, might be violating the names of his law day after day. It is therefore the community of Israel practiced a certain custom, even in conflict with the norms of the Torah, that meant that this was permitted. The consequence of this bold assumption did not alarm that generation. ... The German rabbis recognized in the action of their people a sort of translation into reality of the law of God, thus as it was transmitted for generations from father to son. End quote. If this reasoning was to be considered valid with reference to the standards of ritualistic law, it was even more valid if applied to widespread and profoundly rooted customs, on the ritual lawfulness of which the Ashkenazi Jews, despite appearances, appear to have no doubt. The rabbis did not therefore hesitate to approve practices and customs such as that of the consumption of blood, even when they appeared in obvious violation and of the prohibitions of the Jewish law. The persistence of the custom of ingesting dried blood in medicinal elictuaries, widespread among the Ashkenazi Jews until modern times, is testified to in the response of Chaim Ozer Grodzinski, 1863 through 1940, a respected rabbi of Vilna, responding to a question dated 1930 relating to the lawfulness of medications based on dried animal blood to be administered to sick people who were not in peril of their lives. The Lithuanian rabbi recalled the tradition rooted for generations among Ashkenazi Jews, quote, as to the problem of the lawfulness of administering animal blood to a patient who is not in danger, since the blood has lost part of its elements and has been dried, this is my response. Therefore, Grodzinski went on to explain, quote, if the blood is completely dried, it must certainly be permitted, ... And even in the case of true and proper blood, as long as it was watered down, permission may be granted in an emergency. And yet, since it is easy to use dried blood, which is considered by all to be perfectly lawful, it is impossible to imagine a state of emergency which would permit the oral ingestion of blood dissolved in water. End quote. In conclusion, the Jewish custom in the Germanic territories throughout history of consuming potions and medications based on animal blood, without regard to the ritualistic prohibitions of the Torah, appears to be incontrovertibly confirmed by authoritative and significant Hebraic texts. As we have seen, the compendiums of Segulot in many cases expanded the lawfulness of using human blood to be administered dried and dissolved in another liquid, which was to be recommended, not only for therapeutic purposes, but in conjurations and exorcisms of all kind. The Trent defendants were perfectly well aware of this and listed a long case of history of it based on personal experience, even if during the first moments of the trial they may have considered it expedient to mention the biblical prohibition against the ingestion of blood, which is well known to everyone, as if it were applied to them scrupulously in everyday reality. The records of the Trent trial were also to reveal not only the generalized use of blood by German Jews for curative and magical purposes, but the necessity which the accused, according to their inquisitors, are alleged to have felt to supply themselves with Christian blood, and that of the baptized child in particular, above all in the celebration of the rites Pesach, the Jewish Passover. In this case, all they had to do was turn to specialized acknowledged retailers of blood, or indurate alchemists and herb alchemists, to obtain the required goods. But it was necessary to ascertain that the object of purchase was actually that precious and much sought after commodity, young Christian blood, despite the facility of falsification and adulteration. And this was not an easy thing to do, or something to be taken for granted. During the trial for ritual child murder brought against the Jews of Waldrick, a village a short distance from Freiburg in 1504, the victim's father, Philip Bader, was later found to be the murderer of the victim, little Matthew, and therefore executed publicly, thus illustrating the perpetrator's relations with the Jews. In his deposition, rendered to the judge, Bader, admitting obtaining a certain amount of blood from the child's neck without intending to kill him, to sell the blood to the Jews, who, according to him, paid high prices for that type of merchandise. In this case, the Jews are said to have refused to buy it, saying that Bader intended to swindle them, offering them animal blood instead of the blood of a Christian child. For their part, the Jews of Waldrick advanced the theory that the unnatural father had killed the child, probably during a clumsy attempt to take blood from the carotid artery and profit from the sale. In any case, it seems certain that in the reality of the German territories, blood was frequently purchased and sold at high prices for the most diverse purposes, and that young human blood was certainly preferable to animal blood. It was, therefore, foreseeable that the ambiguous and equivocal sector of selling and purchasing human blood was rife with fraud and counterfeiting for the purposes of increasing one's profit with minimal effort. According to the Trent defendants, their more alert clients had demanded that the resellers provide certificates of ritual suitability signed by serious and acknowledged rabbinical authorities, as was customarily done for food products prepared according to the religious rules of the kashrut. No matter how paradoxical and improbable this fact may appear to our eyes, so much so as to make one believe that it was invented out of a whole cloth by the judicial authorities of Trent, we believe that this matter deserves a certain amount of attention and precise verification, where possible, of the underlying facts and the particulars upon which it appears to be built. Both Maestro Tobias and Samuel de Nuremberg, Angela de Verona, Mossy the old man of Würzburg, and the son Mohar, all recalled having come into contact with these retailers of blood, often according to them equipped with rich rabbinical authorizations. Sometimes they even recalled their names and origins. In some cases, they described their physical appearances with numerous details. Abramo, Maestro Tobias' supplier, is Sacco of Neuss, from the bishopric of Cologne, Orso of Saxony, Jacob Chieslitzer, also of Saxony, are not names which mean a lot to us. These are the names attributed to these itinerant merchants, originating in Germany and traveling, with their leather purses with waxed and tin-plated bottoms, to the Ashkenazium communities of Lombardy and the Trevento region. Quote, "Old man," unquote, Mossy da Würzburg assured the judges that in his long career he had always acquired the blood of Christian boys from trustworthy persons and retailers bearing the required written rabbinical guarantees, which he called, quote, testimonial letters, end quote. So as to not to be too vague about it, Sacco de Gridel, cook in Angela de Verona's house, recalled the manner in which the wealthier Jews of Clayburg, a city under the domination of Filippino de Rosa, acquired the blood of Christian children from a rabbi named Simon, who lived in Frankfurt, then a free city. This, quote, Simon of Frankfurt, end quote, is certainly identical with Shimon Katz, rabbi of the Jewish community of Frankfurt, am Maine from 1462 to 1478, the year of his death. Shimon Katz was also the chairman of the local rabbinical tribunal. Rabbi Shimon Katz maintained also close relations with the spiritual leaders of the Ashkenazium communities of northern Italy and maintained close relations with friendships with Yosef Kalin, almost undisputed religious head of the Italian Jews of German origin. To consider him a common trafficker in Christian blood, as Sacco the cook claimed, frankly impresses me as an oversimplification and not very believable in the absence of other information in support of such a singular thesis. Undoubtedly, more serious or worthy of consideration, even if extorted by means of cruel, coercive methods, was the related testimony of Samuel de Nuremberg, undisputed head of the Jews of Trent. Samuel confessed to his inquisitors that the entrant peddler Orso from Saxony, from whom he had obtained the blood, presumably that of a Christian child, bore credential letters signed by Mossy of Hall of Saxony, Ledorium Principalis Magister. There appears to be no doubt that this Mossy of Hall was identical with Rabbi Moshe, head of the Yeshiva at Halle, who, together with his family, enjoyed privileges granted by the Archbishop of Magdeburg in 1442 and later by Emperor Friedrich III in 1446, including that of adorning himself with the title of Jodenmeister, i.e. the Principalis Magister Judaeorum, as Mossy is described in Samuel de Nuremberg's deposition. We know that Mossy abandoned Halle, a particular apparently ignored by Samuel, as early as 1458, and had moved to Poznan in Poland to pursue his rabbinical activity in that community. The text of the certificate of guarantees signed by Mossy of Halle, which accompanied the purse of dried blood sold by Orso of Saxony, was quite similar to the text of an attention commonly issued in relation to permissible food. Quote, "Be it known by all that which is carried by dove is kosher." End quote. 56. It is understandable that the script intentionally omitted any mention of this type of merchandise dealt in by Orso. Samuel, once he had bought the blood, wrote his name on the white leather of the purse, which featured a list of German merchant clients and a signature in Hebrew, Rabbi Shmuley Mi Trent. Wow. And that's the end of chapter 6. We will go ahead and skip the notes, and I will see you all chapter 7 on the next video. Thank you.